The coffee shop smelled like burnt dreams and stale pastry, but Maya didn't notice anymore. She'd worked the morning shift at Bean there for 3 years now, ever since she'd dropped out of grad school. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face as she wiped down the counter for the 100th time that day. Her hands moved mechanically, muscle memory guiding her through the motions while her mind wandered to places she tried hard not to go. She was 26 now, 3 years since everything fell apart, 3 years since she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya looked up with her practiced customer service smile already in place. But the smile froze on her face, then crumbled like dry clay. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the harsh Lowe's Angel's sunlight, was Ethan Pierce, her Ethan. Except he wasn't hers anymore, hadn't been for 3 years, and the man standing before her now barely resembled the boy she'd left behind. Gone were the thrift store jeans and worn sneakers, the messy hair and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. This Ethan wore a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his hair perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven and sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that made her stomach drop, those same green eyes she'd once loved, now cold and assessing as they swept over her. "Maya," he said, and his voice was different too. Deeper, more controlled, edged with something she couldn't quite identify. "It's been a while." She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it across the empty shop. 3 years of rehearsing what she'd say if she ever saw him again, and now all those carefully constructed speeches evaporated like steam from the espresso machine behind her. "Ethan," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Getting coffee. Isn't that what people do in coffee shops?" The casual cruelty of his tone stung more than she'd expected, but she deserved it, didn't she? She'd earned every bit of his coldness. "Right," she said, grabbing a cup with trembling hands. "What can I get you?" "Black coffee, large." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. "And we need to talk. Are you free after your shift?" Ethan, I don't think." "It's not a request, Maya. I'll be at the table in the corner. Your shift ends in 20 minutes according to the schedule posted on the wall behind you." He'd always been observant, even when they were together. But this felt different, calculated, like he'd planned this entire encounter down to the minute. Maya made his coffee in silence, hyper-aware of his eyes on her as she moved. Her hands shook as she handed him the cup, and when their fingers brushed, she felt the same electric jolt she'd always felt when they touched. But if he felt it too, he didn't show it. He just took the coffee, dropped a $100 bill on the counter for a $5 drink, and walked to the corner table without looking back. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Maya's life. She served 2 other customers, wiped down tables she'd already cleaned, and tried not to look at the corner where Ethan sat, his phone in hand, completely relaxed like he owned the world. Maybe he did now. She'd heard rumors through mutual friends, former mutual friends. How he'd moved to Silicon Valley after she'd left him. How he'd started some kind of tech company. But she'd deliberately avoided learning more, afraid of what she'd feel if she knew he'd succeeded without her. When her shift finally ended, she untied her apron with numb fingers and walked toward his table like she was walking toward her own execution. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Maya sat. For a long moment they just looked at each other. She could see the changes in him more clearly now, the subtle lines around his eyes, the broader set of his shoulders, the confidence that radiated from him like heat. This wasn't the struggling musician she'd fallen in love with at 20, this was someone else entirely. "You look different," she said, because someone had to break the silence. "So do you." His eyes swept over her again, and she felt suddenly conscious of her stained work shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, the exhaustion that probably showed on her face. "Though I suppose working in a coffee shop wasn't exactly your career plan when we were together." The words hit like a slap. "Ethan, do you know why I'm here, Maya?" She shook her head. "I bought this building." He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Actually, I bought the entire block. This coffee shop, the boutique next door, the apartments upstairs, all of it. Closed the deal yesterday." Maya's world tilted. "You, what?" "I'm renovating, turning it into a tech hub for my company's LA expansion. We're moving our West Coast operations here, and I'm personally overseeing the transition." He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Which means, effective immediately, I'm your landlord, and in 2 months when the renovation begins, I'll be your boss." "My boss?" The words came out strangled. "Bean there is being converted into a high-end cafe inside our new building. The owner was very motivated to sell, and he's recommended keeping the current staff during the transition. You'll be offered a position at 3 times your current salary, full benefits, stock options." He paused, his eyes boring into hers. "Working directly under me." Maya couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. "Ethan, you can't what? Can't be successful? Can't come back to the city where you destroyed me?" His voice was still calm, but she could hear the edge underneath now, sharp as broken glass. "Or can't offer you a job that would quite literally change your life." "Why would you do this?" She leaned forward, desperate to understand. "Why would you want me anywhere near you after what I did?" For the first time since he'd walked in, something flickered across his face, something raw and painful that was gone before she could identify it. "That's a good question," he said quietly. "I've spent 3 years asking myself why I'm not over you, why I still think about you every single day, why I built an empire but it all feels empty because you're not there to see it." He stood abruptly, buttoning his jacket. "Take the weekend to think about it. The job offer letter will be emailed to you Monday morning. I suggest you read it carefully before making any decisions." "Ethan, wait," but he was already walking toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at her over his shoulder. "For what it's worth, Maya, you look exactly the same as the day you told me you didn't love me anymore. I used to dream about seeing you again, about you realizing what you'd given up." He smiled, but it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. "Be careful what you wish for, right?" Then he was gone, leaving Maya sitting alone in the empty coffee shop with tears streaming down her face and the weight of 3 years of regret crushing her chest. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. Maya couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything except Ethan's cold green eyes and the way her name had sounded on his lips, familiar and foreign all at once. She'd tried calling him. The number she had was disconnected. She'd searched for him online and found hundreds of articles about Ethan Pierce, tech wunderkind, founder and CEO of Pierce Innovations, a software company that had revolutionized data security and was now valued at over $50 million. There were photos of him at industry conferences, at charity galas, always alone or with business associates, never with a woman on his arm. $50 million. She remembered when they'd struggled to make rent, when they'd eaten ramen for weeks because Ethan had spent his last paycheck on a new guitar string. She remembered holding him when he'd gotten rejection after rejection from music venues, whispering that everything would be okay, that she believed in him. But she hadn't believed in him, had she? Not when it mattered most. The email arrived Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m., just as he'd promised. The subject line read, "Employment Opportunity Pierce Innovations." Maya stared at it for a full 5 minutes before opening it. The job description was extensive. She'd be managing the cafe operations inside the new tech hub, overseeing a staff of 20, coordinating with building management and executives. The salary made her dizzy. $300,000 a year, plus benefits that included full health care of $401,000 with company matching, and stock options that could be worth millions if the company continued to grow at its current rate. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of making, more security than she'd had in her entire life. All she had to do was work for the man whose heart she'd broken. At the bottom of the email was a single line, "My office. Friday at 6 p.m., don't be late." EP Pierce Innovations' temporary LA office was in a sleek high-rise in downtown, all glass and steel and minimalist design. Maya felt completely out of place as she rode the elevator to the 20th floor, her palms sweating, her heart racing. She'd worn her nicest dress, a simple black number she'd bought for a job interview 2 years ago, and pulled her hair back in a professional bun. But she still felt like an imposter stepping into a world she didn't belong in. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A beautiful woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper suit looked up from behind a marble desk. "Maya Rodriguez?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. "Yes," Maya managed. "Mr. Pierce is expecting you. Conference room B, down the hall to your right." Maya followed the directions on shaky legs. The hallway was lined with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of Los Angeles as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She remembered watching sunsets with Ethan from the roof of their crappy apartment, sharing a beer and talking about the future. He'd always said he'd make it big someday, that he'd give her everything she'd ever wanted. And she'd told him it wasn't enough. The conference room door was open. Ethan stood with his back to her, staring out at the city, his hands in his pockets. He'd shed his jacket, and his white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms she remembered too well. For a moment she let herself look at him, really look at him, and felt the familiar ache in her chest that had never really gone away. "You're 3 minutes early," he said without turning around. "I appreciate punctuality." "Ethan, can we please talk, really talk?" He turned then, and the look on his face made her take an instinctive step back. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder, more controlled. "We are talking about your employment." He moved to the conference table, picking up a tablet. "Have you reviewed the offer?" "Yes, but, and do you accept?" Maya wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't understand why you're doing this." "I'm offering you a job, Maya, a good job, better than you'll get anywhere else in this city with your qualifications." He set the tablet down, his eyes finally meeting hers. "Unless you think you're too good to work for me now, that's not fair." "Fair," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair, let me tell you what's fair. Fair is spending 3 years building something from nothing while trying to forget the woman who told you that you'd never amount to anything. Fair is lying awake at night wondering what you did wrong, what you could have done differently, why you weren't enough." "Ethan, I never said you wouldn't amount to anything. You said I was wasting my time. You said my music was a pipe dream. You said you needed to be with someone who had ambition, who had a future." Each word was precise, carefully chosen, and Maya realized he'd been holding onto these memories for 3 years, letting them fuel him. "So I gave up music and learned to code. I built a company, I became the man you said you needed." He moved closer and she could smell his cologne, expensive, sophisticated, nothing like the cheap body spray he used to wear. "And now here you are, working in a coffee shop, and I'm worth more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes. Funny how things work out." The cruelty in his words stole her breath. "You think this is funny? You think I don't regret every single day what I did to you? Do you?" He was close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the barely contained emotion beneath his controlled exterior. "Do you really regret it, Maya, or do you just regret that you bet on the wrong horse?" "I loved you," the words burst out of her before she could stop them. "I loved you so much it terrified me. And yes, I was stupid and scared and I said terrible things I didn't mean, but I loved you, Ethan. I never stopped loving you." For a moment, just a moment, she saw something break in his expression. Something vulnerable and raw and achingly familiar, but then his mask slipped back into place and he stepped away from her. "Love isn't enough," he said quietly. "You taught me that." Maya felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So what is this? Revenge? You want me to work for you so you can watch me suffer? I want you to see what you gave up." He turned back to the window, his shoulders tense. "I want you to spend every single day knowing that the man you thought would never be anything is now everything you said you wanted. And I want to know if you feel even a fraction of what you made me feel." "Ethan, the job offer stands until midnight tonight. Accept it or don't. Either way, this conversation is over." He pulled his phone from his pocket, already dismissing her. "Jennifer will validate your parking on your way out." Maya stood there for a long moment, watching him pretend she didn't exist. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she needed to explain, but the rigid line of his back told her he wasn't ready to hear it. "I accept," she said softly. He didn't turn around. "Good, you start Monday. HR will send you the paperwork." "Thank you. Don't thank me, Maya." His voice was tired now, all the anger drained out of it. "You're going to earn every penny." The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Maya's life. True to his word, Ethan worked her harder than anyone else on staff. While the other cafe employees had regular 8-hour shifts, Maya found herself pulling 12 and 14-hour days, learning new systems, coordinating with contractors, attending meetings about design elements and menu planning and operational efficiency. Ethan was always there, watching, evaluating, pushing her to do better. He was never cruel, never openly hostile, but there was a distance between them that felt wider than the ocean. He called her Miss Rodriguez in front of others and barely looked at her when they were alone. Every interaction was professional, cordial, and completely devoid of the intimacy they'd once shared. But there were moments, brief, painful moments, when she'd catch him looking at her with something in his eyes that wasn't quite hatred. Moments when their hands would brush passing papers and they'd both freeze, the air between them electric. Moments when she'd laugh at something one of the staff said, and she'd glance up to find him staring at her with an expression of such longing it made her chest ache. The new building was taking shape beautifully. The old coffee shop had been gutted and redesigned into a stunning 2-story space with exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and sleek modern fixtures. The upstairs would house Pierce Innovations' executive offices, while the ground floor would be the cafe, high-end enough to attract the tech crowd but welcoming enough to remain accessible to the neighborhood. Maya poured herself into the work, partly because she was terrified of disappointing Ethan, and partly because it was easier than thinking about the mess her life had become. She'd moved to a new apartment closer to the building, started working out again, cut her hair into a more professional style. She was transforming, she realized, into someone who might actually deserve to be part of Ethan's world. But was that what she wanted? Or was she just proving she could be the person he'd needed her to be 3 years ago? She was wrestling with that question on a rainy Tuesday evening, long after everyone else had gone home. She'd stayed late to review vendor contracts, the cafe space dark except for the desk lamp she'd brought from home. The rain drummed against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound that made the world feel very small. "You're still here." Maya jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Ethan stood in the doorway, his jacket soaked, his hair dripping water onto the floor. He looked exhausted, the carefully maintained professional facade cracking around the edges. "I wanted to finish these contracts," she said, her voice shakier than she'd like. "The coffee supplier is waiting for approval. It's 9 p.m., Maya, go home. You're still here. I own the building. You work for me." But there was no heat in his words, just weariness. He moved into the space, water dripping behind him, and stood at the window watching the rain. "Do you remember that night it rained like this? When we were together," Maya's breath caught. It was the first time he'd referenced their past relationship voluntarily. "Yes. We were in your apartment, power went out, we lit every candle you owned and danced in the dark to music playing on your phone. You sang to me," Maya whispered. "That song you'd written, about the girl who saved your life. That was about you." He finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her want to cry. "Everything I wrote back then was about you. You were my muse, Maya. You were the reason I believed I could be something more than just another failed musician in LA. Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Don't." He held up a hand, stopping her. "I don't want your apologies. He ran a hand through his wet hair, frustrated. "I thought having you here would help me get closure, that I could prove to myself I was over you, but it's killing me, Maya. Every single day, having you so close but so far away, it's like being slowly torn apart." Maya stood, her legs trembling, contracts forgot. "Then let me back in. Let me explain what happened, why I said those horrible things. Will it matter? Will anything you say change what you did? Maybe not, but you deserve to know the truth." He laughed bitterly. "The truth? Okay, Maya, tell me the truth. Tell me why the woman who said she loved me, who promised we'd face everything together, walked away the moment things got hard." "Because I was scared." The words exploded out of her, 3 years of guilt and regret and self-loathing pouring out in a torrent. "Because my mother called me and told me my father was sick, that they couldn't afford his treatment, and I was drowning in student loans and working 2 jobs and I couldn't see a way out. And you were so focused on your music, so convinced it would all work out, and I knew that if I stayed with you, if we stayed together, we'd both drown." Ethan stared at her, shocked. "Your father was sick. You never told me, because you were dealing with your own stuff. You just lost your gig at that bar, you were depressed, you weren't eating, and I couldn't add my problems to yours." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. "So I told myself the best thing I could do was let you go. I told myself you'd be better off without me dragging you down. And I said those awful, cruel things because I knew they'd make you hate me enough to move on. Maya, my father died anyway," she continued, her voice breaking. 3 months after I left you. All that sacrifice, all that pain, and I couldn't save him. And I've spent every day since then wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, if I'd destroyed the only good thing I ever had for nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. Rain pounded against the windows, lightning flashed, illuminating Ethan's face, and Maya saw tears mixing with the rainwater on his cheeks. "You should have told me," he said hoarsely. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me. I know. I know, and I'm sorry, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to understand that I never stopped loving you, not for one single day." Ethan closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he opened them again, the look he gave her was filled with such a complex mixture of pain and anger and desperate, aching need that Maya felt it in her bones. "I wrote code for 18 hours a day for 2 years, he said quietly. "I taught myself programming languages, built prototype after prototype, lived on vending machine food and 3 hours of sleep because the only way to stop thinking about you was to exhaust myself completely. I built Pierce Innovations on the foundation of trying to forget you. I know. And the whole time, all I wanted was to become someone you could love, someone worthy of you. I told myself I'd show you, that I'd make you regret leaving me." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "But standing here now, looking at you, all I can think is that I never stopped being that same stupid kid who would have done anything for you. Money didn't change that, success didn't change that, you still own me, Maya, you always have." Maya couldn't breathe. "Ethan, I hate you for what you did to me." His voice was rough, raw. But I hate myself more for still wanting you despite everything. I want you too, she whispered. I never stopped wanting you. The space between them evaporated. One moment they were standing apart, the next his hands were in her hair and his mouth was on hers, and 3 years of longing and regret and desperate need crashed over them like a wave. Maya clutched at his wet shirt, tasting rain and salt and all the words they'd left unsaid. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was air, fierce and hungry and almost desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan pressed his forehead against hers. "This is such a bad idea," he murmured. "The worst," Maya agreed, but she was already pulling him back down for another kiss. They ended up against the wall, rain hammering the windows, 3 years of separation burning away in the heat between them. His hands traced paths they'd memorized years ago, finding all the places that made her gasp. She tugged his shirt free, running her hands over the muscles he hadn't had when they were together, marveling at how much had changed and how much had stayed exactly the same. "Tell me to stop," Ethan breathed against her neck. "Tell me this is wrong." "Don't stop," Maya whispered back. "Please don't stop." But he did stop, pulling back to look at her with eyes that were clearer now, more focused. "Not like this. Not here, not when we haven't talked about anything real." He smoothed her hair back from her face, his touch achingly gentle. "You deserve better than being pressed against a wall in an empty building. Ethan, have dinner with me. Tomorrow night, let me take you somewhere nice. Let us actually talk about everything that's happened." His thumb traced her lower lip and she shivered. "Let me do this right." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." He stepped back, creating space between them that felt both necessary and unbearable. "Go home, Maya. Get some sleep. I'll pick you up at 7. She gathered her things in a daze, hyper-aware of his eyes on her as she moved. At the door, she paused, looking back at him. He was standing by the window again, watching the rain, and he looked both powerful and vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "Ethan," he turned, "I really am sorry. For everything." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I know, tomorrow, okay." Maya nodded and left, walking out into the rain with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. She just kissed Ethan Pierce. She just told him the truth she'd been hiding for 3 years, and tomorrow they were having dinner. Everything was about to change again. She just hoped this time it would change for the better. Maya changed outfits 7 times before settling on a deep green dress that matched Ethan's eyes. It was simple but elegant, expensive enough that she'd felt guilty buying it, but worth it if the look on his face when he picked her up was any indication. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was none of the coldness from before, just genuine appreciation and something softer underneath. "You look good too." It was an understatement. He wore dark jeans and a white button-down that hugged his shoulders perfectly, casual but still obviously expensive. He looked like the successful CEO he'd become, but there was also a hint of the boy she'd loved, the slight nervousness in his smile, the way his hand shook just slightly when he opened the car door for her. The car was a sleek black Tesla, and Maya couldn't help but smile. "You finally got your dream car." "One of them." He glanced at her as he pulled into traffic. "I have a collection now, but this one's my favorite for city driving." "A collection?" Ethan Pierce, tech mogul with a car collection. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." "Sometimes I can't either." His expression turned serious. "There were so many times I wanted to call you, Maya. When the company got its first big investment, when we closed our first major deal, when Forbes did that profile on me, every milestone, my first thought was wanting to share it with you." The confession made her throat tight. "Why didn't you?" "Pride, anger, fear that you wouldn't care." He turned down a side street she didn't recognize. "And maybe because part of me was still that heartbroken kid who believed you when you said I'd never be enough." "I never should have said that." "You were always enough, Ethan. More than enough. I was just too scared and stupid to see it." They drove in silence for a moment before he pulled up to a small, elegant restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't flashy or pretentious, just intimate and perfect. The hostess greeted Ethan by name and led them to a private table in the back, away from other diners. He'd planned this, Maya realized. He'd chosen a place where they could talk without being overheard or interrupted. They ordered wine, and then they were alone with nothing but 3 years of silence stretching between them. "Tell me about your father," Ethan said quietly. "Please." So Maya did. She told him about the cancer diagnosis, the aggressive treatment plan that insurance wouldn't cover, the mounting medical bills that had crushed her parents. She told him about dropping out of grad school, about working doubles at the coffee shop and taking a second job waitressing at night. She told him about the phone call at 3 in the morning, her mother's voice hollow as she said, "He's gone." Ethan listened without interrupting, his hand reaching across the table to hold hers halfway through. When she finished, there were tears on both their faces. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I'm sorry you went through that alone. I'm sorry I wasn't there. You couldn't have been there, I pushed you away. But I could have fought harder. I could have asked questions instead of just accepting your words at face value." He squeezed her hand. "I was hurt and angry, and I let my pride keep me from seeing that something was wrong." "We were both young and stupid," Maya said softly. "We both made mistakes. Maybe, but I want to do better now if you'll let me." Her heart skipped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that spending the last 6 weeks with you has been torture, but it's also reminded me why I fell in love with you in the first place. You're brilliant, Maya. The way you've transformed the cafe operations, the ideas you've brought to the table, the way you treat the staff, you're incredible at what you do." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But more than that, you're still you. Still the woman who laughs at terrible jokes and stays late to make sure everything's perfect. Still the woman I never got over. Ethan, I don't want to be your boss, Maya. I don't want to be the guy who hired you to prove a point. I want to be the man who deserves you this time around." He looked at her with such intensity it stole her breath. "If you'll give me another chance." "Give us another chance." Maya felt like her heart might burst. "I want that, God, Ethan, I want that so much." "Then let's do it right this time. No secrets, no running away when things get hard. We talk to each other, we trust each other, we face everything together." "Together," Maya agreed, and when he leaned across the table to kiss her, it felt like coming home. The next few months were a blur of happiness Maya had forgotten existed. She and Ethan took things slowly, dating properly this time, dinners and movies and long walks through the city. He introduced her to his world gradually, taking her to industry events and company parties, always keeping her close, always making sure she felt comfortable. The cafe opened to rave reviews, quickly becoming the go-to spot for the tech community and neighborhood locals alike. Maya had been promoted to director of hospitality, overseeing not just the cafe but the entire building's guest experience. She thrived in the role, her natural warmth and organizational skills making her invaluable to Pierce Innovations. But more than the professional success, it was the personal growth that mattered. She and Ethan learned each other all over again, the people they'd become in 3 years apart. He'd grown more confident, more assured, but he'd also developed a tendency toward workaholism that worried her. She'd become more independent, more capable, but she'd also built walls around her heart that took time to dismantle. They had their first real fight 3 months in, when Maya discovered Ethan had paid off her student loans without telling her. "You had no right," she shouted, pacing his penthouse apartment like a caged animal. "Those were my responsibility. I wanted to help. I don't need you to save me, Ethan. I'm not some charity case you need to rescue. That's not what this is." He stood too, frustration clear on his face. "I have more money than I know what to do with, and you're drowning in debt. Why wouldn't I help you? Because I need to stand on my own. Because I need to know that you're with me because you want me, not because you're trying to fix me." The words hung in the air between them, and Maya saw the moment Ethan understood. "Oh, Maya." He pulled her into his arms, and she went stiffly at first before melting against him. "I'm not trying to fix you. You're not broken. I'm just trying to give you the life you deserve." "The life I deserve is one I build for myself," she said against his chest. "I know you want to take care of me, and I love that about you, but I need to take care of myself too. Can you understand that?" "I can try." He pulled back to look at her. "How about this, you pay me back? No interest, whatever timeline you want. That way it's a loan, not charity. That could take years. Then I guess you're stuck with me for years." He smiled, and she couldn't help but smile back. "You're impossible. You love me anyway." "I really do." They worked through it and through other conflicts that arose, his jealousy when a coffee supplier flirted with her, her insecurity when she met his impossibly polished ex-girlfriend at a charity gala. But they talked through everything, honored their promise to face things together, and slowly, carefully, they built something stronger than what they'd had before. 6 months after their first dinner, Ethan took Maya back to the roof of her old apartment building. Someone else lived in her unit now, but the roof access was still unlocked, still the same dusty, forgotten space where they'd watched 100 sunsets together. "Why are we here?" Maya asked as they climbed the stairs. "You'll see." The roof had been transformed. String lights hung from posts that hadn't been there before, creating a canopy of soft light. A blanket was spread in the center with a picnic basket, champagne on ice, rose petals scattered around. "Ethan," Maya breathed, "did you do all this? Had some help?" He led her to the blanket, both of them sitting cross-legged like they used to. "I wanted to bring us back to where it all started." when we were just kids with dreams and no idea how hard life was going to get. Maya looked out at the city lights, remembering all the nights they'd spent up here planning their future. We were so naive. We were happy. He took her hand and she noticed his palm was sweating. I want us to be happy again, Maya, really happy, the kind of happy that lasts. I am happy, happier than I've been in years. Good. Because I have something to ask you. He reached into his jacket pocket and Maya's heart stopped. 3 years ago, I had a ring. It was a cheap thing I bought at a pawn shop, but I was going to propose to you. I had this whole speech planned about how we'd struggle together and make it work and build a life from nothing. He pulled out a small velvet box. But then you left, and I threw that ring in the ocean during a particularly dramatic moment of heartbreak. Maya laughed through her tears. That sounds like you. This ring is different. He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow prisms. It's not from a pawn shop and we're not struggling kids anymore. But the question is the same. Maya Rodriguez, I have loved you since I was 20 years old. I loved you when I had nothing, and I love you now that I have everything. You are the reason for all of it, the success, the money, the empire I built. It was all to be worthy of you, and I know I'm still not worthy, that I'll probably never be worthy, but I'm asking anyway. He took a shaky breath. Will you marry me? Maya was crying openly now, unable to form words. She just nodded frantically, and then she was kissing him and he was laughing and crying too, and they were both shaking as he slid the ring onto her finger. Yes, she finally managed to say. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They stayed on that roof until dawn, wrapped in each other's arms under the string lights, talking about their future like they used to, but with the wisdom of everything they'd survived. They talked about the wedding, about kids, about growing Pierce Innovations and maybe starting new ventures. They talked about traveling the world and buying a house with a yard for the dog Maya had always wanted. But mostly they just held each other, two people who'd been broken and lost and found their way back through 3 years of pain to something stronger and better than before. I wrote you a song, Ethan said as the sky started to lighten. Want to hear it? You still write music. I never really stopped, I just stopped sharing it. He pulled out his phone, queuing up a track. This one's called The Girl Who Came Back. The music started and Maya recognized Ethan's voice immediately, though it was richer now, more mature. The lyrics told their story, the love, the loss, the years apart, and the miracle of finding each other again. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and hopeful all at once, and by the time it ended, Maya was sobbing. Ethan Pierce, you're going to make me cry off all my makeup. Worth it, he kissed her forehead. I want to share that song at the wedding if that's okay. It's more than okay. It's perfect. They watched the sunrise together, and Maya thought about how 3 years ago she'd been convinced leaving him was the right choice. How she'd been so sure she was protecting him, saving him from a future dragging her down. She'd been so wrong. Because here now, with a ring on her finger and her head on his shoulder, and the whole future spreading before them like the sunrise, Maya understood something she'd been too young to know before. Love wasn't about being worthy or perfect or having all the answers. Love was about showing up. About choosing each other every single day, especially on the hard days. About building something together that was stronger than the sum of its parts. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked softly. How lucky I am, how I don't deserve this second chance, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning it. You already earned it, Maya. You earned it by being brave enough to tell me the truth, by being strong enough to let me back in. He tilted her face up to his. And for the record, I'm the lucky one. I'm a better man because of you. Everything good in my life exists because you made me want to be worthy of you. We're both lucky then. The luckiest. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the newly opened cafe that had brought them back together. Maya wore a simple white dress, and Ethan wore the same suit he'd worn the day he'd walked back into her life. Their vows made everyone cry, especially when Maya promised to always believe in him, and Ethan promised to never stop proving himself worthy of that belief. He performed The Girl Who Came Back during the reception, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Afterward, they danced to the same song they'd danced to in her apartment during that rainstorm, back when they were broke and young and convinced love was all they needed. Turned out love and a $50 million company didn't hurt either. Maya's mother was there, smiling through tears, telling Maya how proud her father would have been. Ethan's team from Pierce Innovations celebrated with them, along with staff from the cafe and old friends who'd watched their relationship implode and marveled at its resurrection. But the best moment came late in the night, when the party had wound down and it was just the two of them swaying on the dance floor, the cafe lit only by candlelight. Thank you, Maya whispered against Ethan's chest. For what? For not giving up on me, for coming back, for giving me the chance to make things right. Thank you for breaking my heart, Ethan said, and when she pulled back to look at him in surprise, he smiled. If you hadn't, I never would have built all this. I never would have become the man I am now. Everything happens for a reason, Maya, even the painful things. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, those 3 years were just wasted suffering. But if they led us here, to this moment, to this life, then they were worth it. Maya thought about that as they danced, about how sometimes the worst mistakes could lead to the best outcomes. About how breaking apart had allowed them both to grow into people capable of building something lasting. I love you, Ethan Pierce. I love you too, Maya Pierce. Her new name sent a thrill through her. Maya Pierce, wife of a millionaire. Director of hospitality, the woman who'd been given a second chance and hadn't wasted it. What are you smiling about? Ethan asked. Just thinking about how far we've come, from that rooftop to here, from broke kids to. This is just the beginning, Ethan promised. We have decades ahead of us, decades of building and growing and loving each other. Decades of you working too hard and me having to drag you away from your computer. Decades of you being brilliant and me trying to keep up. Decades of proving to each other that we made the right choice. We did make the right choice. Ethan pulled her closer. You were always the right choice, Maya. Even when you left, even when I hated you, even when I was trying to forget you, you were always the only choice. Maya kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, their cafe glowed with warmth and possibility. Outside, Lowe's angels hummed with life, the city where they'd fallen in love and fallen apart and somehow, miraculously, found their way back to each other. 3 years ago, Maya had broken Ethan's heart and walked away, convinced she was doing the right thing. She'd been wrong about so much back then, about what he needed, about what she needed, about what they could become together. But standing here now, wearing his ring, bearing his name, building a life with the boy who'd become a man who'd become her everything, Maya knew one thing for certain. Some love stories don't end when they should. Some break apart, shatter into a million pieces, and spend years lost in the darkness. But the truly great ones, they find their way back. They rebuild stronger and better than before. And sometimes, just sometimes, the girl who broke your heart comes back. Not because you're worth $50 million, but because your heart was always worth everything. Epilogue 5 years later, Maya sat in the newly opened Pierce Innovations campus in San Francisco, watching Ethan present to a room full of investors. He was in his element, commanding the space with the confidence she'd always known he possessed, but that he'd had to grow into. The presentation was about the company's new initiative, using tech to provide affordable healthcare solutions to underserved communities. It was a cause close to both their hearts. Maya had been the one to suggest it, remembering the medical bills that had destroyed her father. Ethan had run with the idea, throwing Pierce Innovations' considerable resources behind it. They were calling it the Rodriguez Initiative, named for Maya's father, and it had the potential to change millions of lives. And I want to thank my wife, Maya Pierce, our Chief Impact Officer, for her vision and dedication to this project, Ethan said from the stage, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. None of this would exist without her. The room applauded, and Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Chief Impact Officer was a position Ethan had created specifically for her, recognizing her passion for using their wealth and influence to make a real difference. She oversaw all of Pierce Innovations' philanthropic efforts, and it was the most fulfilling work she'd ever done. After the presentation, they drove home to the house they'd bought in Marin County, a beautiful sprawling property with the yard for the dog they'd adopted, a golden retriever named Sunset after all those rooftop evenings. You were amazing today, Maya said as they pulled into the driveway. We were amazing, Ethan corrected. It's your project, Maya. I'm just the guy who writes the checks. You do a bit more than that. Maybe, he grinned, then grew more serious. But really, thank you for everything, for sticking with me through the crazy growth phase, for pushing me to think beyond just making money, for making me a better person. We make each other better, Maya said simply. That's how it's supposed to work. They walked into their home hand in hand, Sunset bounding up to greet them. And later, after dinner and wine and making love in the bedroom that looked out over the bay, Maya lay in Ethan's arms thinking about the impossible journey that had led them here. At 23, she'd walked away from the love of her life, convinced she was doing the right thing. She'd been lost and scared and drowning, and she'd made the worst decision of her life. But sometimes wrong decisions led to unexpected places. Sometimes they forced growth that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Sometimes they created space for people to become who they needed to be before they could really be together. Penny for your thoughts, Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Just thinking about how grateful I am for this life, for you, for the second chance we got. Me too, he kissed her temple, every single day. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left? If we'd stayed together through all of it? Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes, but honestly I think we needed to break apart. As much as it hurt, I don't know if I would have pushed myself the way I did if I'd had you to fall back on. And you needed to stand on your own to prove to yourself that you could survive anything. So you're saying we needed the pain. I'm saying we needed to grow, and sometimes growth is painful. He pulled her closer. But we made it through. We found our way back, that's what matters. Maya thought about the girl she'd been at 23, insecure, afraid, convinced she knew what was best for everyone. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, capable, building a legacy alongside the man she loved. The journey between those two versions of herself had been brutal, but it had been necessary. I wouldn't change anything, she said finally, not even the 3 years apart, not even that, because those 3 years gave us this. This house, this life, this love that's strong enough to survive anything. She looked up at him, this man who'd loved her at her worst and her best, who'd turned pain into empire and loss into purpose. We're not the same people we were, Ethan. We're better, we're us, he agreed. Finally, really us. Outside, the stars came out over the bay, and somewhere in Los Angeles, the cafe where they'd reunited was closing for the night, and on some rooftop, maybe another young couple was watching the sunset and planning a future they couldn't possibly predict. Love stories didn't always go the way you expected. Sometimes they broke your heart. Sometimes they asked more of you than you thought you could give. Sometimes they required you to walk away before you could come back, but the ones worth keeping. They found their way home. Always. Maya Pierce, formerly Rodriguez, formerly the girl who broke Ethan's heart, fell asleep in her husband's arms, grateful for every mistake and miracle that had led her here. At 23, she'd walked away from love. At 26, she'd been given a second chance. And now, at 31, she was living proof that sometimes the best thing you can do is break everything apart. Because that's the only way to build something truly unbreakable.